Well, Jai Baba, everyone, and good evening. I wanted to welcome Laurent to as our guest speaker tonight. Laurent has been an avid scholar of Baba's teachings, very much going into depth and giving seminars on forgetfulness and the topic of surrender and such. He's also an author. He's authored many books on spirituality. And tonight he will enlighten us with his deep knowledge on Baba's teachings and his long association also with Don Stevens, who was one of Baba's early Western followers way back from the 1950s. So over to you, Don. Welcome. And
thank you, Goher. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Laurent Weichberger. I'm very thrilled that it's almost Baba's new life in America, and it is Baba's new life in India. So those of us who are coming on from India, happy new life to you. Goher and I haven't really planned out an agenda so much as I would really like to do Q&A. So Goher, if you can ask me questions, I'm happy to answer them. And of course, I have many things I could talk about. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer or talk about what I know from Baba.
Yeah. Well, if you would begin by enlightening us about your deep association with Don Stevens and what was the most that you gained from being in his company and spending so much time with him?
That's a good question. Well, so I should start off with how Don and I met. That might be important to start with. So some of you may have known that I did a book called A Mirage Will Never Quench Your Thirst. And if you knew Anne Conlon, she was working at the time at the Sherryard bookstore. I knew her from before that, even from when I came to Baba in New York City in 1986. But the time of this story was later. We were both living in Myrtle Beach, and then I was living in Georgia. And so I saw Anne when I would go to Myrtle Beach because she was living there and working at the Sherryard bookstore. And I had in my mind to do a project for Baba related to his message about drugs, not to use drugs. And you may know that in the 1960s, Baba said, the greatest spiritual work in the world today is to get young people to stop using drugs. And so I think that drug problem is still very much a problem in the world. But I was very keen on getting Baba's drug message out. I knew that Alan Cohen and Robert Dreyfus and Rick Chapman were the ones that Baba had selected for that work. But I wanted to do some work with this message, God in a Pill. And Anne Conlon heard about my project from me, and she would not allow me to do the project based on God in a Pill. And I said, Anne, I'm not really asking you. I need to do this work. I need to buy these copies of God in the Pill. She said, no, she said, you don't understand. It needs to be rewritten. This God in a Pill message needs to be rewritten for a modern audience. And then she said, Laurent, would you rewrite it? I was really stunned, And so I told her no. But in my heart, I heard yes. So she wouldn't let it go. And she said, would you at least try? So I said, okay, yes. And I bought one copy instead of all the copies I wanted for this work I was trying to do. And I spent years rewriting it for a modern audience. And one of the things I did was I reached out to Rick and Robert and Alan, all three of them. And I said, I can't do this drug work without your blessing. And they each gave me so much love and support and their blessing, way beyond their blessing. Alan Cohen traveled to Arizona to meet with me about the project. I met with Robert at his house. He wrote material for me. I met with Rick Chapman in California. So many wonderful things happened, and it did come together. And right just before we were about to publish the book, it became A Mirage Will Never Quench Your Thirst. Right before the publication, I realized one of the stories in the book was Don Stevens talking to Mayor Baba about LSD. And I had never asked if Don could read it and approve it. But then I thought, well, Don's still alive. I should ask him to read the version of the story I have in the book and to approve it. And so I wrote to him an email and I said, Don, I don't know you. We've never met, but I have this story of you and Baba talking about LSD in the book. Would you please read what I have here and approve of it so that I can publish this book? I don't want to publish it without your blessing, you know? And he wrote back almost immediately and he said, I'm so glad that you wrote to me, Laurent. I did go over your writing, and he had comments for every sentence of what I had in the book. Some of it was, you know, this is exactly what Baba said, and others was, well, he never said this to me, but he might have said it to somebody. And then he said, and you're missing a lot of what Baba said to me. And he went giving so much more information. So he really transformed that part of the book, and it became much more um, real and true and accurate. And I was so grateful. And then after that exchange via email, I said, well, Don, thank you so much for what you contributed to this book. And I want to sign off by saying, if you don't write your own autobiography, and then you should die without having shared your story of life with Baba, it would be a tragedy. We would have lost so much because your wisdom of your experience of life with Baba is so deep. I would really encourage you to write that story. And if you say that you're not interested, I would say, I will help you to do it. And he wrote back and he said, you're right, I'm not interested in that. But thank you for the offer. So then the book came out, A Mirage Will Never Quench Your Thirst. And then that went well. And then he wrote to me a few weeks later and he said, he would like me to do some writing for Neti Neti, which was a newsletter that he was involved with in England with the English group, and France. A number of the people in England and France contributed to it. And he asked me to write an article for that about sanskaras. And then the more we went back and forth on things, the more he wanted me to be involved, until eventually he started to tell people that I would be writing his autobiography, basically, that he would work with me. It would be the authorized biography, that he would provide everything that I needed to do, and that people should support me to do that. So I became very rapidly part of his group in America, and eventually I moved to England to work with him. So I was part of his group in England. And then I traveled with him in France and India and Mexico and America and all over. And we just worked together for years. So from 2002 until his passing in 2011, we worked extremely closely together, and we made a number of books together. So that's kind of an introduction. Let me pause there for a moment. I thought I heard some binging, so I was just trying to see if anybody's phone was binging or something like that. Any questions from that point? I know you asked about what I got from that experience, but I want to just pause there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to grab some water. Hold on a second.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions on that topic, feel free to ask Laurent. Well, I guess he'll be back in a minute. Okay.
I can tell you what I got from it. A number of things come to mind. Mm-hmm. One of the things is that, you know, Don said, so he told me so many stories, but he said, you know, and he always called me Little Bear. He said, you know, Little Bear, you'll hear that Baba gave this order and told that person what to do. And, you know, he said, but in my experience with Baba, it wasn't really like that. He said it was more like Baba waited for you to invite him directly into any aspect of your life. And only then would he deal with that with you. And if you didn't invite him, he would allow you to do it your way. And he wouldn't interfere. But once you invited him in to that part of your life, he would work with you on it without, shaming you or saying, wow, what took you so long to get around to this or anything. He would just, at that point, work with you on it. And he said, for example, in my life, Don, this is Don speaking. He said, in my life, I kept two things away from Baba as long as I possibly could. That was my sex life and my finances. He said, until I had made such a complete mess of both of them that I knew I had to bring Baba into it. And then I did. And then he dealt with both of them very directly and very matter-of-factly. And when I heard that Baba waited to be invited in, that was extremely moving to me. So I just wanted to share that. The other things I would say is that Don said when he would arrive at Mehrabad or Merazad, Baba was very casual. And Baba had said to him, and this is a very rare thing for Baba to say to anybody, but Baba had said to Don, you don't need to write to me, cable me, call me. You just come. If you're anywhere near India, you just come and be with me. So Don had this open door policy that very few people in the world had. And Don would literally just walk into the middle of a conversation or anything, or sometimes walk in and Baba would say, oh, good, Don, we're playing cards. Come join us, like he was part of the family. And truly, Baba had said, Don is my son, he said at one point. And at another point, he said, Don is my spiritual son. And he said, Don is really one of the Mandali. He said, not just one of the Mandali, but one of the close Mandali. So he had an extremely casual and loving relationship with Baba that transcended many of the rules or the formalities that people talk about. And so he really had an extraordinary experience with Baba. Here's another story that I heard from Don. He said, we had to go to this program with Baba, some darshan or something. And on the way there, they got into the car, and Baba always sat in the front next to the driver, driver's seat on one side, Baba in the front. And Don was always in the back. And they're driving along, and he said suddenly Baba just reached his hand back and held Don's hand from the front seat, reaching back, holding Don's hand in the back seat while they were driving. And Don said, I had never, ever experienced this from anybody in my life. His father certainly didn't treat him like that, his own father. He said, I had never experienced that kind of loving relationship with anybody. And he wasn't used to it, and he didn't know what to make of it, but he loved it. But it was also a little bit like, wow, what's happening right now, And then Baba eventually just pulled his hand back up to the front seat, and there was no discussion about it. It was a moment. It was an expression of Baba's love that was also very human. And Don would use the word very tender. And it moved him deeply, right? But there was no discourse about it. There was no, Baba didn't get out of the car and explain why he did it. Nothing like that. It was just that. It was so natural, so real, so, one would say so human, but another person would say, no, but that's divine love. Like, it was all of that, right? And it wasn't stuffy. There was no ceremony. There was no ritual. There was nothing like that. It was just being together in love. So, I got so much about all this. And another story is that Don had done something extremely brave. I could tell the story, which is a long story. But what he did that was brave is a long story. The other thing that he did was he told Erich about this. this thing that he had done. And Eric said, "You did that?" And Don said, "Yes, I did that." And Eric says, "For that bravery, I will reward you." Eric told, "For that bravery, I will reward you with what you've been asking me for years, which is to finally tell you the story of what it was like to be with Baba on the new life." So Don said, "Oh, wow, great." So Don got this reel to reel. You might have seen the reel to reel tape recorders back in those days. You know, they didn't have iPhones and all that with fancy software. It was just a tape, reel to reel, and a microphone. And then Erich got the women Mandali, and they spent days, Erich and the women Mandali, narrating story after story of what it was like to be with Baba on the new life. And when it was all finished, days of storytelling, all recorded, Erich said, "Well, Don, now that I've finally told you the story that you've been asking me to tell you, what do you think about that? How do you feel hearing that story?" And Don said, "Well, Erich, I can't even imagine how you could have endured all of that hardship. It's unfathomable to me." And Erich said, "Well, Don, then I failed you." And Don said, "No, why? Don't say that. Why do you say that?" And he was feeling really crushed by that. And Erich said, "No, I've failed you because I have failed to communicate the glory of companionship with the avatar of the age, and that it wasn't a hardship to be on the new life. There was a joy of being Baba's companion and the companion of the avatar. That's how I failed you. That companionship is what sustained us on the new life. There was no sense of hardship." And so from that point on, Don changed his whole relationship to Baba and the Baba community, in that he really leaned into companionship with Baba and with his fellow Baba lovers as the key to spiritual growth. That without that spiritual companionship, it wasn't going to really work out. He really felt that Baba had created an archetypal sort of template or pattern that now we should be embracing. That's how he communicated it to me, and he wrote books about that, and he lived that way. So I would say my experience of Don was that he had the humility to include me, who, I mean, I came to Baba in 1986. Don came to Baba in 1945. So I was 50 years younger than Don. And he included me as a companion, and he treated me as a spiritual brother and equal. He didn't set himself up as higher or lower. He met me where I was as a spiritual companion, and he allowed me to be his companion. And that was a beautiful experience for me. I don't know if I'm answering your questions, Goher, but I'm
Yes,
doing
you are.
my best.
Absolutely. What a deep insight you've given. Yeah, that clears it up for me. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have questions for Don? I'm sorry, for Laurent.
I see Jay Shma.
Seema.
Yeah,
Jay Seema.
I have a
Yes.
question, Laurent. I mean, you became Baba lover at the very young age of 17 years old. So I would
Yes.
like to know how you got to know Baba and what is your Baba story.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Where are you today, Jay Seema?
I live in Connecticut.
India. Oh, Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Yeah,
He lives in Connecticut.
Connecticut.
India. Connecticut in
US.
northeast,
Yeah.
northeast US. Okay. Um, thank you. Um, and go ahead. Can you make
Yes.
me either co-host or host?
Oh,
You don't have-
I'm sorry. Seema can help with that. He's my tech guru. I have no idea about
Oh,
computers. Okay, so there you
Yeah.
are. You co-host. He just did that.
okay, good. So I'm happy to answer that question, but it's a bit of a sad story, so I hope you don't mind the sad story. Um, I was 16 when my father committed suicide, and so that was a bit of a shock to my family and to myself. And so navigating without my father, who I felt a deep connection to, and I had to deal with my mother and my sister. My sister's older than me, but she was struggling with some mental health issues, and my mother was devastated. So I really, I spent about 6 months drinking too much alcohol, smoking marijuana, and then I realized, like, what what is this? I'm not making any progress. I feel completely stuck. Well, what is wrong with me? And when I reflected on that, which I really uh, went deeply into what am I struggling with and how do I get out of this situation, I realized that I had no capacity to get unstuck in my emotional and feelings around my father's suicide, and I was not making any progress with my life. Naturally, I was 16, turning 17, and I didn't really have psychological or spiritual tools. We weren't raised in a spiritual environment. My father was a painter, an artist, and my mother worked in the fashion industry in Manhattan, in New York. So it was a very kind of intellectual culture at home, and not spiritual or even very heart centered. But I mean, we loved each other, but I wasn't given the tools to figure this out. So I said to myself, well, I'm in need of spiritual help, so I need a spiritual teacher or a spiritual master to help me. And I started looking at that point for my master. And I did it in a very naive way. I went out from my apartment in Manhattan, and I would literally look in the eyes of everybody I saw every day. I would look at their faces and their eyes, asking, is this the person who's my spiritual master? And although that was a naive approach, I was actively looking. I did not find my master in the first week or in the second week. But after 2 weeks, I went to a friend's house, and that friend was a follower of Muktananda, different lineage. But I didn't feel any connection to Muktananda. I'd seen his picture and I felt zero. I didn't feel repulsed. I didn't feel attracted. There was no connection. But at his house, he had two guests. And my friend was a very odd kind of friend. He was a painter and a collage artist, and he made other kinds of sculptures and stuff. And he almost never had anybody at his house. But this time he had two guests, two men, and one of them was an English professor at Rutgers University. And that professor and I had a very strong connection. And he's the one who told me about Meher Baba. And so when I saw Baba's photo for the first time, I said I had no connection to feeling anything from Muktananda. But when I saw Meher Baba's photo for the first time, I had such a deep connection to Baba that just looking in his eyes, I recognized him immediately as my spiritual master. I felt his presence. I felt him speak to my heart. He basically said to my heart, I am your master. I am your ancient one. So at 17, I recognized Baba there was no cogitation. It was like I just recognized him instantly from the photo. And I've been following Baba since that day.
Great. Thank you, Laurent.
Yeah. That was many years ago. That was 1986.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Anyone else? Elizabeth. Go ahead.
Hi, Laurent. I was just wondering, when you saw the picture of Baba, did you see it at the professor's house, and then once you saw that, were you drawn in by talking about Baba to this professor and other people, or was it more, did you do any reading, or did you happen to find out about I'm just curious. It's a really unusual journey.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like everybody has an interesting and unusual journey, but I was just wondering, I mean, you were so
Yeah.
young, and such a tragic thing. Of course, suicide is hard to get over. I mean, I don't
It
think
was,
you ever really do, to tell you the truth, but because it's so traumatic.
yeah.
Anyway,
Thanks, Elizabeth, for the question. Yeah. No, so what happened was he was he was an unusual professor. He actually didn't identify himself as a Baba follower to me. He told me about Mayor Baba, and then he said to me, I would like you to meet some followers of Meher Baba without including himself in that category, which was kind of odd looking back on it. But at the time, it didn't seem odd at all because he was so helpful to me. I just said, sure, I'd be happy to. So we went to a coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan. And the Baba lovers he asked me to meet with were Patty and Doug Stalker, um, and their daughter, Sarah Stalker. She was about 2 years old at the time, the daughter. And as soon as Michael, his name is Michael, as soon as Michael and Patty and Doug saw each other in the coffee shop, they immediately started talking very fast about everything Baba, India, Mara. I mean, it was just nonstop. And I didn't even understand half of what they were talking about. There were so many new places and terms and people. There was no way for me to follow the conversation because it was too many references that I couldn't understand. So I found myself turning towards the daughter in her high chair at the table and playing with her. Oh, this is how it went. And so I was kind of focused on their daughter while they were focused on talking to Michael about Baba. And then the mother, Patty, said to me, Laurent, do you know what we're talking about? And I said, no, Patty, I can't follow what you're talking about because I really don't understand what you're talking about. So it's hard for me to follow. And she said, well, we're talking about Mayor Baba's beloved, Mara, who has said recently that she's going to pass away soon. So we're encouraging Michael to make his first trip to India to meet her. And she said, do you know anything about Mara? Do you know who she is? And I said, no, I don't know anything about her. And she said, well, Baba said Mara is the purest soul in the universe.
Mm.
And I really took that in. It hit me very hard in a positive way. And it caused me to really become internal. And I started to imagine what that means, the purest soul in the universe. I thought, what does that mean, the purest soul in the universe? And I kind of went into a kind of a reverie of Mara being in a cave in India, like a mountain with a cave at the top and a line of people going down the side of the mountain who just wanted to enter the cave and, you know, give her respect and homage and all that. And I saw her sitting inside the cave with women around her protecting her, just women around her. And so I was kind of in this imaginary reverie thing. And Patty said, what are you thinking about? And I said, oh, I was thinking about what you said, that Baba had mentioned that Mara is the purest soul in the universe. And she said, what do you think about that? I said, well, and I explained this kind of imagination I had. And she said, no. Mara would never allow anybody to come and give her that kind of homage and reverence that way that you're thinking. She would always give that directly to Mayor Baba. And I thought, what? Hold on a second. You just said Mayor Baba said she's the purest soul in the universe. Now you're saying she would give that back to Mayor Baba? I was like, what is this? And for the first time in my life, I asked myself, well, who's Mayor Baba then? And I did this all internally. But Michael was sitting right next to me, and he said to the father, Patty's husband, he said, Doug, do you have a photo of the ancient one? And Doug reached into his wallet and he took out a paper and handed it to me. And I unfolded the paper, and it was the 1964 Universal Message that it handed out in New York with Baba's picture in it. So I unfolded this kind of tattered paper, actually, but I didn't even notice the tatters at all. I still have that message, but it was tattered, but it didn't matter because there was Baba's picture inside this tattered Universal Message, and that was the photo that I first saw, was inside the Universal Message, inside a coffee shop, inside of Midtown Manhattan, inside of one of the busiest cities in the world. But it was like everything didn't exist except this Universal Message in my hands. And so when I saw Baba's eyes, I knew I just arrived at finding my master, my ancient one. And so my heart just wanted to close that message up and go home so I could just be with Baba. But I couldn't because I was just sitting there staring at Baba. And then Doug said, "You can keep that." And I couldn't believe it because the feeling of what I was holding was like so sacred, and I felt Baba so strongly that I had a hard time understanding how he could part with it. And I said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yes, you can keep it." And I was like, wow. So I immediately closed it up and I just sat there. I must have looked idiotic because all I wanted to do was leave. I didn't want to talk. And I just was like waiting for this all to be over so I could go home and open it back up again. I must have seemed very strange. And so eventually they stopped talking. And I just said, "I got to go." And I went home and I opened it up again and I read it again. And then for days, I would just get on my bike and ride to a park and sit under a tree and open it up and read it over and over again. I was really idiotic is what it comes down to. I was just totally focused on Baba and I didn't care what anybody thought or what I looked like. And I did this for days. I didn't know there were books. I didn't know there was a Baba Center. I didn't know anything. I thought actually that everything Baba had ever said was in this one Universal Message. I didn't know that he had said anything more. So I just read it over and over and over again for as long as I could until eventually Michael said to me, there's a center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And that made no sense either because being from New York City, of course, there's nothing outside of New York City that's important. So I thought, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, that made no sense to me. But then I thought, okay, well, and then I heard that two Baba lovers from New York were heading there, and that was Ron Cantor and Stephen Paul Miller. And I said, "They're going to Myrtle Beach?" And they said, "Yeah, we're going to go." And I said, "Can I get in the car?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." So I just jumped in their car. I was 17. So I got in the car and we started driving. And then eventually after hours, they're like, "Okay, Laurent, it's your turn to drive." And I said, "I don't know how to drive." So they're like, "What?" They thought I was going to have a turn. And I said, "There's no way I'm getting behind the wheel. I can't drive a car." So I just sat in the back seat the whole time. So we had a tremendous adventure. But that's sort of how it happened. I see Mona's on. Mona,
Yeah.
you have...
There's a question. Yeah. Go ahead, Mona.
Jai Baba, how are you?
Doing great.
I just wanted to know, you spoke about that picture that you saw on the Universal Message. If it is accessible, I'd love to see the picture that actually spoke to you. If it's accessible, it's okay.
Yeah, it's
Thank
a very
you.
famous picture of Baba. It's a famous picture of Baba. He's in a white sadra. It's from 1963 or 64. Very simple picture of Baba, white sadra. He looks very beautiful, but he's older Baba. Mm-hmm. And you can see, I don't know if you ever knew, Baba challenged Mara to find pictures of him when he was younger where he was smiling. He didn't smile. Mm-hmm. And if you look at all the pictures of Baba's life, if you look at them in order from young to old, the older he gets and the more work he does spiritually, that bigger his smile gets.
Yes, that's right.
And so by the time it was 1963, 1964, he had a real smile. And he didn't show his teeth because, he had banged his head and he had lost so many of his teeth from banging his head. But his smile to me was so beautiful. And I could feel in that picture so much love. So I can send you that picture, Mona, no problem. It's a famous picture.
So being that you were living in New York City, Laurent, did you hook up with the New York Society group or the
No. So
Baba?
with all due respect to Harry Canmore and Anna Rosa Karash and all that, I had linked up with the Mayor Baba group that Henry Kishawdi and some others had formed, which was in parallel to the Society for Avatar Mayor Baba.
Okay.
And people from the society group had come over to our group, and I had heard some odd things about what was going on with the Society for Mayor Baba. So I had no interest in that. I've since become friends with Larry Karash and heard, lots of other things, but I really had no interest in anything other than what was working for me at the time, which was our little Mayor Baba group in Manhattan that I met with. And I eventually became vice president of that group under Gus DeGreff. And even though I was so young, they allowed me to be on the board of directors. Eric Tepperman was there, Joan Agan was there, Richard Terwilliger and others were there. So I was just super happy to meet the people who were in that Baba group, and they welcomed me with tremendous love, and great things were happening for me. So I was happy. I didn't need to explore other Baba groups. I just felt like the Baba group I landed in was perfect for me.
Great. And when I was talking with Jeff regarding setting up all these Zoom sessions and so on, and we were talking about you, Jeff mentioned something to me to have ask you when you're on tonight, something about honesty to the Sufis.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell with you? He said,
yeah.
ask Laurent about honesty to the Sufis.
Right. Yeah, of course. So I think, I did actually write Don's authorized biography. So I probably know more about his life than anybody on earth. But one of the stories he told me, and he told me so many stories, is that, he started his spiritual path as a Sufi under Hazrat Inayat Khan's order with Rabia Martin. So he was a Sufi when Rabia Martin told them, I've now put our order and myself under Mayor Baba's guidance. And he said she had gathered all her murids together, all her disciples together, and told them all at once, I've gathered you to tell you I've put myself and our order under Mayor Baba's guidance. And I know that's a big thing to share with you, but I need you to make your own decision. And I'll give you 2 weeks to make a decision about whether to stay with me under Mayor Baba's guidance, or I will release you from your vows and you can go your own way. And, that'll be that. So that's a whole story unto itself. So Don did end up staying with her under Mayor Baba. And then eventually Rabia Martin passed away from cancer, and she made Ivy Deuce her successor. So as Murshida, Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens worked with Mayor Baba to create what became Sufism Reoriented. And they created a charter for Sufism Reoriented, which included the directive from Baba that the Sufis had to be 100% honest. So Don said, there were many points in the charter. This was just one of the points, was honesty. And Don said the Sufis basically freaked out about this 100% honesty, because some of them said, Don, what is Baba talking about? If I'm 100% honest with my wife, she'll divorce me. Or if I'm 100% honest at work, I'll get fired. Like, I can't be, what are you talking about? What does Baba mean? And so they were all talking to Don because he was so accessible. He was like Ivy Deuce's right hand, and they could talk to him about anything. And they said, Don, we have to understand what Baba means, you know? So eventually, Baba came in 1952 and he promised the Sufis to explain to them about honesty because he knew that this was a big issue. So Baba said when he came in 1952 to America, he gathered the Sufis and he said, "Look, I know I promised to tell you. I'm paraphrasing from this point on. I know this is being recorded, so this is a paraphrase of what Don said. So please don't hold my feet to the fire. I'm just telling you how I remember Don explained it to me." He said, "Now I've promised to tell you what I meant by 100% honesty." This is Baba explaining to the Sufis, according to Don and my version of what Don shared. He said, "Now, of course, you're going to be in situations where you might feel you need to share 100% of what you know about the situation. But really, that's somewhat rare." He said, "You also might be in a situation where you feel that you're going to share nothing about what you know about the situation. Not just remain silent. I can't say anything." He said, remaining silent when you feel you have nothing to share about it, even though you know something, but you don't want to share anything. He said, remaining silent is not being dishonest. He said, but really speaking, most situations, you don't need to share 100% of what you know about it, and you don't share nothing about what you know about it. You share something. He said, so let's talk about that something. Now, he said, you know about the situation, and you have to decide how much of what you know about the situation you're going to share with the other person. You also have to decide if what you're sharing is useful to them and meaningful to them. Do they have the right to what you know about it? But in any case, you're going to come up with what you want to share, how much of what you know you want to share. Now, let's say you decide to share 70% of what you know about the situation. And I'm just giving numbers. I don't know what numbers Baba used, but this is the gist of it. So instead of sharing 100% or zero, you decide you're going to share 70% of what you know about the situation. He said, right now, in what you know, there are some things that are considered positive and that the other person is going to like to hear. And there's other things that you know about the situation that the person is going to feel are negative and they're not going to want to hear. But now, if you only shared the positive and you withheld the negative, well, that's not honest. But if you only share the negative and you withhold the positive, that's also not honest. So now what? He said, now you know how much of the situation is positive and negative. Of what you know about the situation, you know the positive and negative aspects of it. So in what you decide to present, that proportion should be present. Not 50-50. It doesn't mean half and half. It means, let's say in the total of what you know, 80% of it is positive and 20% is negative. So in what you decide to divulge, there should be that representative amount of positive and negative. Otherwise, you're spinning it in one direction or the other. You don't want to do that. That's not honest. He said, so that's what I mean by 100% honesty. And now, when I heard this from Don, I thought, my God, this is like PhD level honesty right here. But what I realized after contemplating this version of honesty from Baba is that if you go through that much trouble to do honesty the way Baba's talking about it, my God, it declaws and defangs your ego's involvement to such a degree that you're really trying to obey Baba in a way that I don't know how much room your ego has to work with the situation. It's like you're aligning with Baba on how you communicate. So after that, Baba made Don promise that he would be honest with Baba in his life. Meaning, like, going forward in life, will you be honest? Don said yes. And then the second time, Baba said, Don, I want you to be 100% honest at work. And Don said, yes, Baba. And then a situation came up at work where he worked in big oil at Chevron Oil. Chevron made a mistake. Don was involved and Don's boss was involved, and Chevron made a mistake. And the mistake would cost them millions of dollars because of the mistake. But they didn't communicate the mistake. They just knew about the mistake. So Don's boss came to his office and said, Don, you know about the situation? And Don said, oh, yeah. And his boss said, well, what do you think we should do about it? And Don said, well, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but we made the mistake. And the right thing to do is admit it. And his boss said, but that'll cost us millions of dollars, Don. He said, oh, I know. But I think it's the right thing to do under these circumstances. And, you know, that's the honest way to proceed. And his boss said, I agree with you, Don. And so they took the hit. The Chevron admitted the mistake. They were in some oil deal with, I don't know who. And it was a black eye. Nobody wants to lose millions of dollars from a mistake. And so Don felt that his boss was supportive of his honesty in that situation. And then next time Don saw Baba, Baba said, Don, does your boss allow you to be honest at work? And Don said, yes, Baba, he does. So not only did he get the order from Baba to be honest, but then the situation came up and he practiced the honesty. And then Baba even checked on it later. How's that for an honesty story?
Yeah. Remarkable.
I think so.
Yeah. Really.
And I never took a vow of honesty. I'm not a Sufi and Sufism oriented, and I never took any vows like that. But after hearing all this, I do try to practice honesty the way Baba described it. And I can guarantee you it's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult. I see Rich has his hand up, and so does Elizabeth.
Yes. Go ahead.
I don't know who was first.
Lauren, I'm really getting a kick out of this. This is great stuff. This is the kind of stuff I really like. And also, I happen to be one of those people who drifted into New York City as a youngster in '71, and blah, 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 connected with Dr. Kenmore. So the New York thing is really close to my heart. But anyway, moving on from that, my question for you, the honesty thing is amazing, because I found myself wanting to make things look much rosier to people and not include the other stuff. But in terms of you, Laurent, how have you found Baba to work within your inner life, your soul, to dissolve some of your sanskars or sanskaric knots, or things that are presented to you within yourself in your life that are challenges?
Yeah, that's a very big question. So thank you for the question, Rich. So in the name of honesty, I'll tell you, I don't even know what sanskaras are, first of all. I know what Baba says sanskaras are. I've read God Speaks and I've read discourses, but as God is my witness, I've never seen a sanskara. I really don't know what it is. I believe Baba, but I don't have that experience of sanskaras. My experience is that through my everyday life, Baba brings the lessons that I need for loving people more, having the opportunities to love them more, obeying him more, having the opportunity to obey him more, surrendering more, having the opportunity to surrender more, forgiving more, having many opportunities for forgiveness. And the way that he tends to work with me in my experience is helping me to become aware of those opportunities to have the courage to embrace those opportunities, even when it's not comfortable at all.
Mm.
So comfort for me is not a requirement on the spiritual path. It's
Mm.
usually the opposite, that the more uncomfortable it is probably the direction I need to go.
Mm.
And walking into that fire or even dancing in that fire with Baba. So that's kind of my immediate answer. I don't know if that helps at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jay Baba. Elizabeth, you have something?
Yes, it's again on the honesty issue. And I thought somewhere I read, but I don't recall the source, that Baba said being completely honest is not necessarily real honesty. That if you hurt a person, that it's not honest. Maybe he told a Mandali member or what. I'm sorry, I don't know the source, but I was wondering if you had heard or recall anything like that.
Yeah, it's in our new book. It's called 21 Spiritual Lessons for the 21st Century. The quote is in that book.
Oh,
That book's about to be published probably in November of this year. But the gist of it was a conversation that Erich and Baba had.
okay.
And Erich was particularly hard with somebody. And Baba eventually said, "What was that?" Basically the gist of it was, what was that about? And Erich said, "Baba, I was just being honest, And Baba said, no, no, no. Honesty is that which uplifts. The truth, and honesty is not that which crushes. But the actual quotes in the book, 21 Spiritual Lessons for the 21st Century, I'd be happy to get you a copy of that book.
Yes. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I was getting out of that is that honesty should not be used as a tool to bludgeon somebody.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the gist of what Baba's version of honesty was about. Once you take the time to step back, the way he talked about it, and like, how much am I going to present? How much of the positive? How much of the negative? Is this useful to them? Do they have the right to what I'm going to share? It kind of removes the weaponizing that the ego can do with this honesty and makes it more about being of service to the person. Does that help at all?
Yeah. Well, being raised the way I was raised, we were told to be honest. And of course, I took that literally for the longest time. And
Right.
and hearing this from Baba made me rethink what that actually is. And also rethink, what is the reason I'm being honest? I mean, I do think you should be honest. I mean, I think that's really important. It's like honoring the truth.
Yeah, but the truth is so slippery here, right? So let's think that through for a second. If my wife comes out of the closet wearing a dress and says, "Does this dress make me look fat?" And I say, "Yeah, it makes you look incredibly fat." Well, you could say that's the truth. Or I could say, "It's not my favorite. Can I see other options?" Like, there's so many ways to respond that are less hurtful.
Yes.
So like, what's the point of saying it in a way that's like unloving and unskillful? Why not say it in a way that's more loving and more skillful? Now, I'm not saying I'm always successful. I'm saying I keep trying, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Baba always said, never hurt the feelings of anyone. So that was of prime importance. Yeah. So
Hey, Tony, I see a hand up.
go
Hey,
ahead, Tony.
how are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Tony.
I've been thinking a lot, especially today, about one of the things that I learned from Don, I guess in the early 90s, late 80s, something like that. And I practiced this my whole life. And at some point, I think in the last year, I just stopped. And I didn't know I had stopped. And I resumed it today. I've had some major confusing difficulties over the last couple of months. And then today I remembered And I put time aside to do this thing which Don suggested, which was talking to Baba out loud and laying out the problem. I think he said, explaining it as you would to an intelligent 12-year-old. But I was wondering if you would share this with folks, because it's such a powerful and important thing.
Well, I think you just did. I don't have a tremendous amount more to say, except that in my experience with Don, definitely in the morning, but also sometimes in the evening, depending on what kind of day we had. In the morning, he would sit propped up in bed with a pillow behind his back against the wall, talking to Baba. And it was kind of like, I'll give you the sense of how it sounded like, well, Baba, I heard that, and so I could hear what he was saying, but I didn't hear every word. And it was sort of a narration to Baba of his own process around his life and his thoughts and feelings. And he would ask Baba questions or tell Baba things and make statements. And then frequently he would tell me that he would, either intuitively or even stronger words would come that he would write down, and he would share that with me. Certainly in the mornings, he would do this with Baba, sometimes in the evenings as well. And so I have collected a tremendous number of these writings from Don about his experience.
So there's one story then that I would add, because this is the one I remember him telling, was that he was working with the oil industry. It wasn't, I don't think he was with Standard Oil at that point, but he was in advisory capacity in some other oil company. And there was a problem, and the ship was stuck, and the possible costs to this were enormous. And he did not know what to do. And he said, I went into my office. This is as best I remember it now. He said, I went into my office. I informed my secretary that I wasn't to be disturbed until I came back out. And I sat there in a normal tone of voice. Now, when he was with you, he maybe was protecting his privacy, but in that case, he was alone in his office. And in a normal tone of voice, I explained the problem to Baba. And I explained to him about letters of credit and all sorts of technical things. And that's the phrase that stuck with me. I explained it to him as you would to an intelligent 12-year-old. So you're not giving him all the jargon of the business, but this is what was going on. And when he had fully expressed the thing and he felt that Baba had heard him out, he took the sign off his door, he went back to work, and the matter resolved. He didn't immediately get some flash of an answer. But the matter resolved, the ship was saved, everything worked out okay. But from that moment, he had that habit of speaking to Baba. Oh, the other thing was that what occurred to him that Baba would always ask him what happened since the last time you saw me. And in one case, his mother had died. Don's mother had died. And Baba said, why didn't you cable me? Why didn't you let me know? I said, well, Baba, you know everything. And besides, I know you're so busy. He said, no, you must let me know. You must tell me, you must let me know. And from that, he took the leap to say, well, Baba's dropped his body, but still, Baba wants us to inform him of what's going on.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
And not that you're asking Baba to intervene, but the fact that you're informing Baba, Baba is Baba. So his energy, his input, becomes part of the equation then.
Well, to be fair, there were a couple cases where he did want Baba to intervene and give him a direct answer, and he let me know that. But those were rare cases. Yeah.
Anyone else with a question for Laurent? Well, I was reading your book, Forgiveness, Laurent.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I've read it many times, and something that jumped out to me today was, and I would like to share it with the group here, that you say, you're talking about surrender. And just the choices you have when you come to a point of surrendering something. And you say, this reminds me of another thing Baba said. When you are in the garden, you can either focus on the bugs or on the flowers. I choose to focus on the flowers in my life and ignore the bugs as much as possible. Aspen, who I believe is your daughter, is that right?
Yeah, she's my first child.
Right. Aspen lovingly reminds me, bugs help flowers grow, and without them, there would be no garden. Accepting the bugs as Baba's will and delighting in the flowers is my simple approach, which is connected to surrender and also helps me to forgive. It is also closer to the truth that we are essentially all one. And this daily experience of mine is more like a dream, which when I awaken, I will fully realize was not the reality.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Well, and again, I don't want to mislead anybody. I don't feel I am always successful like that, but I keep striving, right? So
as we all, yeah.
Yeah, like, do I always remember to focus on the flower? No. Do I always ignore the bugs? No, but I try. I haven't given up trying, is what I'd like to say.
We're all in the same boat, I think, pretty much. But as long as we are aware of it and we keep trying with Baba's love, then that's all that's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Very
see
good.
Richard and Elizabeth are back with the hands up.
Go ahead, Rich.
Laurent, I've often tried to, situations come up where I try to communicate to others who the avatar is. And it's very difficult. And I could go into all that, but how do you handle, especially people who maybe don't know who Baba is, but how do you handle communicating that?
Yeah, I've been in a lot of these situations, believe it or not. And there's two things I'd like to say about it. One is it helps me to reflect on the fact that Meher Baba himself did not publicly reveal that he was the avatar until he was 60 years old in 1954. So Baba himself was not in a rush to explain to the humanity at large that he was the avatar. His inner circle certainly had some understanding of that. And then, it rippled out from there. But he wasn't banging a big drum and saying, hey, look at me. The second thing I'd like to say is I usually ask a lot of questions before I say anything about Baba being the avatar. And I ask the person, tell me about your spiritual background. Or, what's your orientation, or what's your spiritual path, or something to give me an understanding of where they're coming from. Because Baba has said in the discourses, your job is to come down to the level of the person you're speaking to and talk to them at that level. Otherwise, they won't be able to understand you at your level. So it's your job to come down to their level and speak in a way that they can really grasp and understand. That's real spiritual service. So I was on a train once, an Amtrak train, and I met a beautiful guy who was, according to his story, he was on his way to go to a seminary to become a priest. He was extremely ardent in his longing for God and in his relationship with Jesus. And I wear this Baba necklace, and he said, well, then who's that, at some point on our train trip. And I love this guy. I had just met him. I loved him. He was really beautiful. And he was obviously devoted to Jesus and, becoming a priest. So when he asked me who's Meher Baba, I had so many possible ways to respond, but I knew from asking questions, I knew his orientation. So I said, well, it's Meher Baba. And he said, I don't know who that is. And I said, well, he's the one who lived the message of Jesus Christ the most purely and the most really of anybody I've ever encountered. And he said, wow. He said, I need to learn more about him. I
Right,
said,
and
I think you would appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because to say to him he's the new Christ, which I could have said, would have really been a shock. It might have been true, but in that situation, I didn't feel that was the right answer to give. I felt like he's going to find out for himself. You know, Baba made it pretty clear that all love for God, but really, I think all love reaches him. And so the more he longs for God and the deeper his relationship with Jesus becomes, the more likely it is he's going to find out everything about Meher Baba. But I told him Meher Baba's name, and I indicated that Baba's aligned with his path. Does that help at all?
Yeah, thank you, Laurent. I often get too excited about telling someone what everyone should know. See what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
very aggressive on that.
I read something recently from Baba that I had never seen before. There's so much material, as we know, right?
Mhm.
But I read something recently where Baba had said, I don't give you my love all at once because you would not be able to digest it. It would be too much for you. So I give it to you little by little so that you can digest what I'm giving you. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's exactly right, first of all. But if I had laid on that poor fellow everything, everything I thought I knew about Baba being the avatar and all that, I don't think it would have gone so well. And so I gave the bit that I felt would be digestible. Does that make sense how I'm talking about?
Just what he needed. Yeah.
I don't know. I never saw him again, but I just did my best, I think Elizabeth was next.
Yes.
Then Tony.
So I'm in a small reading group that's focusing on Bal's book on the new life. And we've been reading about
Jeff Wolverton's book on the new life.
Pardon?
Jeff Wolverton's book about the new life.
Yes. Balji wrote the first 125, and Jeff wrote 250 pages from diaries and journals of Meramani, Meru Goher, and I don't know who else, but yes, a long list, 750 pages total. So we're reading it. And one of the reasons I was particularly interested is because I've heard about the new life. I know there are 3 parts to it. I know the Blue Bus tours took place, during the new life. The Must was that part. And I knew there were a lot of stringent things that they had to do, that it was not an easy life. But do I really know what the new life is? No. So I was very interested in joining this group. So the last few weeks, we've been talking about the preparation for the new life and how Baba called the women together, locked them in a room, and made them make this promise. And then the event with Korshed, which was really interesting. And tonight we were reading about what was said to the men and the reading on the 4 texts from 4 different religions, and anyway, and then finally the oath, and that oath of about 8 things. I just can't imagine how anybody could do those. And you had to say either yes or no. And the one thing that would cut off your relationship is if you did not decide for yourself a definitive yes or no. In other words, if you wobbled. Anyway, what I'm wondering from you is what Don had to say about the new life. Did he go on the new life? I can't remember if he was part of. Okay,
no.
But if he said any.
He met Baba in 1952 in New York City after the new life.
Okay, so if you have any insights either from yourself or Don about the new life and that oath, and I mean, I can imagine it was like an earthquake because they had their whole way of being with Baba was turned topsy-turvy before doing everything he said, and then having to take total responsibility for themselves in the new life.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I mean, I could share a lot, but it's a giant question, right? So there could be a whole just meeting just on this topic alone. But in a short nutshell, I would say that I have no doubt, and I think Don had no doubt, based on what I've heard from Don, that Baba was changing the archetypal pattern of the avatar's work and creation from what in the past was a master disciple type of relationship to what Don felt the future would be like, at least for the next 700 years, which was spiritual companionship. That Baba had created in his own creative, divine way, a nuance in how human beings would relate to God, less in a hierarchical fashion and more as the constant companion that he asked us to be with him. And that companionship would be key, not only in how we relate to Baba, but in how we relate to one another. And so he would talk frequently, Don would talk frequently about the last message on the alphabet board and how in that message you could find the keys to how to live in companionship with one another. And that he would also frequently have us read and discuss, Don would have us read and discuss the Song of the New Life. And that also held the keys to this new pattern of relationship with God and with each other, which is that we don't need a master as much as we need to love God as a companion, and that future generations wouldn't be seeking spiritual masters as much as seeking Baba within and within each other. And of course, spiritual masters would be there, but this kind of stereotype of guru disciple, which has been prevalent for thousands of years, would slowly transform because of Baba's work in the new life to the spiritual companionship in what Don would tell us was small committed circles. And he gave numbers. He said 10 to 12 people maximum in a committed circle that would be the type of dedication that's very rare, where you would not say, oh, well, I can't meet with them this week or this month or whatever because I want to go see this movie or I want to go get ice cream or something. That there was a level of real spiritual commitment to one another. And he had groups like this. And I asked one of the group members, who was a friend of mine, because I was living in England working with Don and met with this person frequently. I said, you've been in this group with Don, living this way that he talks about. How long have you been meeting with Don every month like that? And he said, we meet every month with Don, and I've been meeting with him for 30 years. And I thought, my God, I mean, that's a level of commitment. That's like a marriage. Not that they were together every day for 30 years, but there's a level of commitment to each other spiritually that's extraordinary. And it was beautiful to me to see and to watch. And I participated in it. Mm-hmm. Is everybody going to feel that that's what they want? Probably not. Will people feel that way more and more? I think they will. I think that the old patterns will give way to new patterns, and that Baba lived the new patterns himself, and he left it for us to discover what they are. Tony?
Yes. Hope this doesn't seem too over the top. But I do want to bring this up. I was really happy that that you'd done this book on forgiveness, and mainly because I had come across a book called A Course in Miracles back in '94, I guess, and I felt, this is my feeling, that Baba dictated that book incognito. It's sort of like Christianity reoriented. And a lot of it is about forgiveness. And I've done lots of work with that. I've done their workbook and continued over the years. but I've come across something recently, and I've certainly been working with this on my own, and I kind of want to get your take if you have any experience with something like this. Where intuiting or sensing very strongly something that I had done perhaps in a prior lifetime that was really, really intentionally harmful to others. And not a lightweight thing either, you know. And the intuition was clear enough that I could not ignore it. And so the question became, how do I forgive myself for what I would consider unforgivable? And if I had been, say, that particular person, whether it's literally true or not, it's totally unforgivable. And yet there is no moving on unless you're able to forgive yourself and accept Baba's forgiveness on a very deep level for the worst of all things, say. And I'm wondering if you've ever had to deal with something like that and how you would apply that self-forgiveness, and then particularly on a grand level.
Well, I don't have your level of sensitivity, first of all, Tony. So I don't have any past life memory. I don't know what that was like for my particular soul. I'm not sensitive in that way. I do know, obviously many things that Baba said about it. And I would say that in this present life, I do my best to forgive myself because I want to be able to move forward. But I think there's a fine line also between, and somebody just wrote to me about this earlier today, so I've been thinking about it, the line between repentance and remorse and penance and forgiveness, right? So this is a very interesting topic, and the word "and" keeps coming up for me, A-N-D, in that I can be repentant, remorseful. I can have some aspect of penance where I punish myself and forgive myself. And those can all be going on simultaneously. It doesn't have to be an or. And I think where people get caught up and sometimes stuck is they focus on the or, and that can be a problem. In other words, well, I can either punish myself or I can forgive myself. But maybe the and is more realistic. Maybe there's some penance involved, and the prayer of repentance was given to us for a reason, and I can feel remorseful and forgive myself and move on. Does that help at all?
It's it all kind of feeds into the hopper. It reminds me of Baba in the discourse saying that remorse should not descend into immoderate and gloomy ponderings upon one's shortcomings. I think that's the phrase Baba uses.
Well, he gives the sense that it can be overdone in a way that's also not helpful.
Yeah. No, I've just it's an unusual challenge. I don't know, like I say, if this thing is literally so, but I have sensed this for a long time. And I'm feeling that I'm having physical reactions from not having completely forgiven myself for this thing. So it's
that's a problem. That's now a problem.
Yeah. So it has become more, and I'm working with it. Baba put something on my plate. I'm dealing with it, but
yeah.
The question of of course, if you can't forgive yourself, you're saying Baba has gotten it all wrong.
Right. That's where I think it can be overdone. So
Yeah.
I want to share one more thing in this vein, which is, again, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have all the quotes in front of me, but the gist of it was that Baba said that in order to achieve God realization or self-realization, you have to come into harmony with everything in creation. And then he went on to say, the problem with that is that there are, since the first avatar and since the first masters, there are always masters in creation and the avatar giving their help and their love and their grace. So to resist receiving that help and that grace is out of harmony. Mm-hmm. And I would like to propose that to resist forgiving yourself may also be out of harmony. Mm-hmm. So thank you for the question.
I like that. Thank you for the answer.
Does anybody else have a question? Marion?
Mine is not a question at this moment. I'm here in New York City, and it was more when you said something about not a shift from experiencing Baba as a master and more as a companion. I'm just using the words that I remember. And what I was given in this life was the journey of detaching from all of those that I have expectations with. And so
I love that.
I have to look at what, because that all expectations lead to disappointment and pain. So as you said that, I grabbed off of my shelf where I sit, where it's been there for decades, a little photograph of Baba. And on the back, and I have to look at it a lot to remind me, we've all heard this quote. I didn't write down where it's from. I've read it over and over, but I don't remember where it's from, where Baba said, "Love the one in the many, not the many in the one. I am the only friend who will never let you down."
Right. That's right.
So when I'm looking for those friends to show up and meet my expectations, I get grossly disappointed. And I have to remind myself that I have to process it and see what expectations I have for from them and find out what my real need is and turn that over to Baba. Because Baba said, I'll fulfill every need, not your wants, but I will fulfill every need. So it's such a wonderful process. Be able to be given the tools to do this, because it's a tough journey.
I love what you're saying, and I agree 100%. I love it. Yep.
So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else with a question? I know it's getting a little late. It's almost 11:30. So if none of you have any more further questions for Laurent, then I guess we'll wrap it up for tonight. And Laurent, I wanted to thank you so much for your very insightful sharing, your wonderful, warm stories, and all your Baba love. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
That's
Avatar Meher Baba
Ki
Ki Jai.
Okay. Thank you, Laurent.
Our Meher Baba
Thank
Ki
you.
Ki Jai.
Our
Avatar Meher Baba Ki
Meher Baba
Amen.
Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for sharing too. So till next week, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba.
Laurent.
Laurent, thanks, Goer. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Jaisima.
Hey, Jessima.
Thank you.
Sabine.
How was your trip, Sabine?
Oh, it was wonderful, wonderful
Yeah.
to go to
Yeah.
the Sahavas.
You
Yeah.
got to meet Jeff and
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Nan for the first time, and yeah, a lot of other Baba lovers that live in the
Yeah.
UK, which we had
Love-
never met before. So it was wonderful to be part of a family.
sure.
Mm.
Glad you went.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
You want to quit recording now?
Okay. Thank you.